notice the source of temptation in verses 13 and 14. The source of temptation. Let's look at them here. Verse 13 says, let no man say when he is tempted, I am tempted of God. For God cannot be tempted with evil, neither tempteth he any man. But every man is tempted when he is drawn away of his own lust and enticed. So first of all, we see the incorrect source of temptation. And that incorrect source of temptation is God. I've heard so many people say, maybe you have too, that God tempted me to do this, or God tempted me to do that. Well, verse 13 says plain as day that God cannot be tempted with evil, neither tempteth he any man. Notice the phrase that he cannot be tempted. This comes from the Greek word which is used only here in the New Testament. It carries the idea of being without the capacity for temptation. So in other words, it is impossible for God to be tempted because he does not have the capacity to be tempted, nor does he have the capacity to tempt, for that would go against his very nature and his very character. We must never say that God is tempting us to engage in some sort of an illicit activity. We must never say that God is tempting us to engage in some form of deviant behavior, because that goes against his very character and his very will. We must never say that God is wanting us to do something that will bring honor in, or that will bring shame to his name. And furthermore, we must never try and justify our sin by saying that it was a temptation from God. You ever notice that when we sin, a lot of times we try and justify our sin? We even like to pass the buck. You ever notice that? The Genesis account of creation, Adam and Eve. So when Adam and Eve fell and they made the decision to go against the commands of God, you know what Eve did? She said, yeah, but the serpent, he made me do it. And then you know what Adam said? Adam said, yeah, God, well, Eve did it, and you gave me Eve, so you made me sin. Well, that's the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard of, but that's what we do left to ourselves. We make excuses. We pass the buck anytime we can. But notice here in verse 14, it tells us the source, the correct source of our temptations is our own lust. We are drawn away of our own lust. Now that word lust it refers to a deep, strong desire of any kind. Any kind.